Don't you just love the look of this mock crochet? It's also called the diamond lace stitch or the figure 8 stitch. It's so pretty, but it's really hard to make a nice shaped top or decreased crown that's nearly invisible and keep this stitch pattern going. Well, I have with this hat. It's called the boyfriend hat, and you can make one on your hat as well and maintain this beautiful stitch pattern and decrease as you go all the way up to the top. So today we'll be making the decreased portion. You can also use this for making, say, a top-down bag as well. So today we'll make the shaping of the top or decreased crown here on GoodKnit Kisses. Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches. This video is the last in a series for the boyfriend hat and learning how to make it. You can get the pattern down at the link below on our blog, and you can also get a set of the PDF version without ads if you like that. We also have the videos available in the series. We've got casting on both clockwise and counterclockwise, as well as the main stitch pattern. Then we have measuring it accurately to make sure you've got the right length, as well as changing colors on the accent band. So we'll just be working on the shaping of the top, of course, in this video. We also have this on the Loom instead of the AllnOne. And make sure to check that out. And we've got it in a playlist as well. All right, let's move on and shaping the top on the All-in-One loom. So we are ready to start decreasing our hat. I've got 7 stitch markers plus my beginning stitch marker, so that makes 8. Just make sure one of the stitch markers looks totally different. You can tell which one is your first one. I've already got them placed on my loom, and no matter if you're using this gauge of All-in-One, which is 3/8, or say you're using maybe the 5/8 loom and working the same amount of stitches that's written in the pattern, just how I've got the X loom, that's fine too. Or if you're using another brand of loom, any of those besides the X loom, you'll be able to work just how I'm doing this video. So first you want to take your loom number and divide it by 8, which you should already have a cast on number that reflects that. So this one is 80 pegs for the men's hat. You'll have 64 for women's. So 80 divided by 8 is 10. So we're going to have sections of 10 stitches each. So we have our number 1 peg here that looks different. And then we're going to count that as stitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and then where our 11 would be, we'll call that a number 1 and place a stitch marker here and then begin counting again 10 pegs in each section. So go ahead and place your stitch markers all the way around. Pause your video and I will meet you back up. We're going to start moving some stitches in. Now I do want to say the written pattern, the way you see it, is exactly what is happening on your loom. We'll be working pegs 1 and 2 for a diamond lace stitch, and so you'll see that those 2 pegs are worked, and then I have to move the 2 and the 3 stitch around, and then that 2 stitch gets worked again, and you only work with those stitches in that section, and then you move on to all the other sections, start moving things in one at a time. Technically, that's what's going to happen by my next set of instructions, but I'm going to make it simpler than that because of the way the loom is that this one works, because otherwise it would be kind of a chaotic mess. So you do need to pay attention to what I'm saying, but this round is exactly how every decrease round happens, okay? So we're going to actually move all the stitches inward first. Now, I have my yarn coming from my very last peg in my last round, okay, and then we measured and made sure we have the right length. Okay, so we're going to, instead of working the stitches, I want you to pay attention to all the number 1 pegs, which have the stitch markers, and you're just going to go to the number 2 peg. You're going to pick up the number 2 peg and place it on the 3. And then you can take your 1 and then that stitch marker at the same time and then place them on that peg. Okay, so now this is on the slider here. I can go ahead and loosen this up and move the slider inward. Okay, we're just moving it in by 1 at the moment. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next section. We're just ignoring these for now. Okay, go ahead and move on, and you're going to go to the next section where we're going to put the 2 on top of the 3. It's the same thing again. Pick up your number 1 peg and the stitch marker and place them on that empty peg, and now start walking your stitches inward. Okay, this is the previous section, and we're just moving all of them in, and then it lines up with this new slider. Okay, so we have nothing to do here anymore. Move on to the next section. You're going to go on to the second peg, moving on to the third, and move your stitches in. Okay, so you can see we've moved this one in, so that means that these are going to also have to adjust in. We will be moving the ones on this other side down as well, and so you need to realize that there is some extra room that these need to move. So go ahead and just adjust the sections that you're messing with right now, and then we'll move over here. So I hope that makes sense. So go ahead and move the previous section that you worked, all those in, just like we did before. And that means when you come to that peg with the stitch marker on it, you're going to have to move the stitch marker again, because these represent the number 1 pegs. So there is a lot of moving of stitches, but it's better doing this before you start working them. It'll be easier once you start actually knitting the stitches. Pause your video as you need. When you get to the stitch, when you get to the peg that has 2 stitches on it, and you can pick them up one at a time, but make sure that that bottom stitch stays on the bottom. That's important right there. Okay, so now I'm down where the slider is. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that up and move it in by 1. Okay. Now I'm going to tighten it, and you can see that I have this extra stitch down here, but it technically belongs to the very last section. So I'm just going to continue moving on, and we'll deal with that at the end. So now move on. We've completed the first, second, and third sections, and now I'm on the 4th section. Okay. So now we want to move the 2 onto the 3 like this, but it's going to be easier to start moving in the other slider in the opposite direction. So in this case, we can pick up the 2 and then pick up the 3 and place the 3 on top of the 2. There we go. And I don't have to move this stitch marker here. Okay, and now you can start walking your stitches inward. And if you want to go ahead and get a head start, you can loosen this slider here, and that way it'll allow you some more slack in your knitting. Pause your video as you need. Okay, I finished this section. We're going to move on to the next one. We've got 1 and 2, and this is the same here where we've got, it looks like how we had the very first beginning section where you're going to put the 2 on top of the 3 and move the slider. And so now this one that you just moved, you'll do that again. Okay. And then you can go ahead and move the slider again, loosen it, move it in, and then come down here. So you can see I have 2 extra stitches. Now this is going to be ready for moving in here for these sections. So we've got 1, 2, I've already moved this. We're going to go ahead and move the 2 on top of the 3 here. Okay, you can see I've got 1 extra over here, and so now I'm going to go pick up 2 on top of the 3, and this is the 7th section. Go ahead and move that one peg with the stitch marker. Okay, I'm going back into this 6th section here and moving all these stitches in. Okay, so now this is where I'm moving 2 stitches at a time, keeping them in the same order. Okay, and then now just move these down. We are almost done. I promise this is the most difficult part. And then there's a 2-step process to the rest of this. Okay, so I've got this part down. Now we're on the very last section. You can see that we don't need to move the sliders at all. I've already got it in position, and these just need to move over. So in the same way we did the other side, I do need to pick up stitch 2 and then move 3 onto 2. A little bit tight here. There we go. Place 2 onto the 3 peg, which is now the 2 peg, and then move all the rest of the stitches in. All right, so keep working on that. Pause your video, and I will see you in a moment. The second part of this round 1 is working the stitches. We've moved the stitches, now we're going to work the stitches. You've got a 2-step process. You have 8 pegs all the way around your loom that need to get worked in 2 different ways. The first time you come to it, you're going to only work the top loop, only the top loop of the top stitch, because technically that's our number 2 peg still. So we're going to continue our diamond lace stitch pattern. We're going to go around pegs 1 and 2, just like a diamond lace stitch. We're going to knit over peg 1, 1 stitch over 1, and then we're going to knit over peg 2, the 2nd stitch, leaving that bottom one alone, over the top, okay? And then now the yarn is coming from peg 1, and we want to go around pegs 3 and then 2. Peg 2 has 2 loops. We're going to work those 2 loops, or those 2 stitches, over 1. And that is our decrease. And now we're gonna work peg 3, 1 over 1, and we continue on this stitch pattern until the end of the section, just as you would with the diamond lace stitch. Okay, second to last stitch in that section, and go ahead and work the last peg and your first peg, just in the diamond lace. And we're going to repeat a decrease in a section. So here's the decrease in one section. Work pegs 1 and 2, knit 1 over 1 on peg 1, and knit the 2nd loop on peg 2 over the top, leaving the 3rd down below. Now we're going to work pegs 2 and 3, and we're going to decrease peg 2, lifting 2 over 1. Continue working all the pegs in this section, and then repeat that same technique all the way around the loom. And that will be your decrease round. Pause your video, I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so round 1 is complete. I've got my yarn coming from the very last peg, and my starter peg has moved inside the slider, or at least it has on this particular loom. Your round 2 and alternate rounds. So every other round we'll just be repeating this diamond lace stitch. So there's nothing else to do besides just keep working that main stitch pattern. Do not move anything in. So go ahead and do that one. And then you can repeat that first section around and do exactly what we did the first time, moving in every stitch and then making a decrease round. You're going to repeat rounds 3, 5, and 7, and also 9. So you're going to repeat these 4 more times for the women's size hat and a 5th time for the men's size hat. So it'll be a total of 5 rounds for women's and 6 rounds for men's, and that is in this gauge for the 3/8 gauge. If you're in the 5/8 gauge, you're doing 4 decrease rounds and 5 decrease rounds for the men. So 4 for women's, 5 for men's, but in this one it's 5 and 6. All right, so continue working around, repeat that multiple times, and I'll meet you back when we're at the end of this. You should have 32 stitches for the men's and 24 stitches for the women's on this gauge hat. See you then. Okay, so your shape top, you should have either 5 rounds or 6 rounds with the decreases on them, and then another row of the diamond lace stitch in between. Go ahead and make sure after your last decrease to go ahead and make one more diamond lace round. Pause your video if you haven't done that yet. You should have either 24 stitches or 30 stitches, okay? So I've already got that ready. Now what's going to happen is we're going to make something a little bit different. Now this is different than the 5/8 gauge. It's going to be reducing them down to about half the amount of stitches. We're going to be slipping one, and then the rest of them are going to be SSK. We're basically going to be moving every other peg on top of the next one and reducing this down even further, because what it's going to do is it's going to stack the stitches in a way to where they kind of lay on top of each other and have this smooth crown at the very, very top. Otherwise, it won't put this little part on here, and it'll kind of pucker and go in like that, and it won't make a nice smooth top like this one. Okay, this is actually the needle knit version here. All right, so how we do that is I've got the yarn coming from that last peg here. The first peg we're going to ignore. We're going to be doing this just like we did on the other rounds and decreasing. So the number 1 peg you're just going to ignore for a moment, go to the number 2 peg and put it on 3, okay? And now go to the number 4 peg and put it on the 1. Okay, and yours may be numbered a little bit different because you're on a different size than mine, but basically every other peg now, once you skip that very first one, you're going to be putting it on the next one. So I'm just going to pick up this peg and move it over. And we're just ignoring our stitch markers here. Pick these up and move them over. No need to count. Okay, all right, so you're just going to continue. And then we want to move these pegs in, okay? We won't be able to get it pushed all the way in, but at least you'll be able to make it to where we're going to use less yarn when we work this next round here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start moving in my stitches. I can just loosen up and move my slider down a little bit. Okay, so I've moved in some. Now I'm going to just go ahead and move in some more. I'm just not worried about these stitch markers anymore. So I'm just ignoring them. All right. So I do have a couple of empty spots here in the middle. It's just kind of a tight fit. If you want to, you could just ignore these corner pegs here. And the way to do it would be move it like this and move these two in. Like that. And then repeat it on the other side. Okay, so this is filled in here, and then let's do those here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and work these where we're working the first loop over, just like we did on the other decrease rounds, and then when we come back to it, we'll work 2 over 1. The only exception is peg 1. It's got those 2 pegs on there, or those 2 loops on there, which was actually the first and last one. Just go ahead and work those over at the same time. And now I'm going to work the second peg. I'm just doing the first loop, and now I'm going to move on to the next one that has 2 pegs, and come over here and do 2 over 1. And then now we're going to start our sequence. Just 1 over 1. Okay. And then do the next sequence. Okay. Now I'm going to take these 2 over 1. And then we just do 1 over 1. Okay. And the next pair, 2 over 1. And then 1 over 1. And just continue on in that method. I suggest not putting your work down at this point. Just go ahead and work it in this sequence so that you don't forget where you are. All right, pause your video and I'll see you at the end of this round. Okay, the end of this round, I've still got the last peg and peg 1 to do, so I'm going to go ahead and work that. Again, peg 1, I had already worked the 2 over 1, so now we're just going to do 2 over 1 on the last peg, and then do peg 1 one more time. Okay, and now you're just going to cut a length of yarn for a tail and thread in the remaining stitches with your tapestry needle, and then you're just going to pull through and stitch together or weave together your ends in the pattern. I'll go ahead and pull this off and you can see mine. All right, so I've got this pulled tight, and before I pull it on through, I just want to show you it's a little pointy at the top, and that is perfectly natural for this pattern. We want to go ahead and kind of block it out. I hand block mine and just kind of pull the stitches out a little bit just to make sure. And just kind of do that, and then I wash it and block it. And what I do is just kind of smooth it out, and you can see how it kind of retains this round shape here. Then when you're ready and you've got your tails woven in, you will wet block it. I've got instructions down below on how to wet block. For a hat, you don't pin it out like you normally would wet block. You could steam block it if you want, but when it's drying for a hat, the best thing to do is after it's been kind of pressed out and wrung out with a nice big towel, you'll kind of put your hand in here and kind of like you're stirring a pot and wringing around like that, and then lay it flat, and then every time you kind of pass it by in the house or apartment, wherever you are, just kind of stir the pot again and flatten it in another spot. And what it does is it evens out those stitches and keeps that nice shape there. Okay, so let me show you a little bit on weaving in the ends here. So where the color jog happens, you'll see a little bit of a jog here, and all you need to do is take your ends and just kind of pull them kind of towards each other. So this strand's coming from over here and this one's here. Just kind of pull them towards each other like that. And then you'll weave in the tail and the direction that it would have been going. So I'm going to take this gray and put it back on top of this gray and this beige color back on top of the beige. And when you pull it tight a little bit and flip it over, you can see it sort of starts closing that gap there. And then the same thing for this one. You just pull it in the opposite direction, pull a little bit tighter, and flip it over to the back, and you can see that this this color jog will be less apparent. It's still going to be there, but it'll be less apparent. And just use your tapestry needle to kind of follow the patterning around and weave that in. So after you've got all your tails in and you get it blocked, you're going to have a nice custom fit hat, maintaining that nice round pattern. I hope you've enjoyed learning the boyfriend hat. Please be sure and comment down below and tell us what was your favorite part, or if you've tried this on a different hat as well. Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.